Welcome to today's lesson on Copyright 101. Here, we're going to discuss what copyright is, how it works, and why you need to know about it. So firstly, I would like us to imagine a scenario. Let's say that you have a really good idea for a story that you want to write, and you want to show your idea to the world. So you decide to sit down one day and write out the whole story that you had in mind. And after many hours of work, eventually your story is finished. It's in a physical format that you can access somehow, say written on paper or in a document on your computer. Now, in order to spread your story, you decide to publish it online so that as many people as possible are able to access and read it. And this is all well and good, but sometime later, you find a story that was published by another person online. So you're curious about it. You read the first few pages, and then you realize that this story sounds very familiar. Hang on a minute. This is your story. Someone else has stolen it and posted it online, claiming credit for your work. Or, in other words, this person is saying that they are the one who wrote the story that you know you wrote. This obviously isn't good. So how can we stop something like this from happening? Luckily, there are already legal protections that can prevent your creative works, or anyone else's for that matter, from being copied and distributed by other people. These legal protections are called copyright laws. But what exactly is copyright? In simple terms, copyright is a type of law that prevents an artist's original artwork, such as a book, movie, or song that they created, from being copied, spread around, or even sold by other people. When they're made in some kind of tangible form, whether this be physical, something that you can touch, or digital, something that you see on a screen, for instance, these original works are called intellectual property. Why does copyright even matter, though? Well, lots of different people and organizations create a multitude of works of art for jobs or work or money. A few examples of this would be authors, musicians, and film studios. But even unpublished works by independent artists are protected by copyright, provided that they're in that kind of tangible format. So, if we're going to apply this, let's think back to our scenario from the beginning of the presentation. If another person was selling an original story that you wrote and saying they wrote it, you would probably be upset that you weren't being credited for your hard work, and this is totally fair. But now imagine that while this person is making money off of your work, you are making none at all, because nobody knows that you even wrote the story. This isn't just unfair. This affects your livelihood. So copyright helps prevent this from happening by making it illegal for others to take your work and claim it as their own, especially for profit. So what kinds of protections are given by copyright specifically? And there are several things that copyright owners can do. For one, they have the right to sell and distribute or spread copies of their work. They can also make derivative versions or adaptations of their work. Essentially, what this would mean is they can take their work, change it up in any way that they would like to, and then distribute that changed version of it. They can also perform or display the work in any public way. So, this would include things like screening a film, or performing a song, or even just hanging up a photo in an art gallery. Now, crucially, copyright owners also have the right to give others permission to sell or distribute their work under certain conditions, and we'll get to that in a minute. So, by this point, you may be thinking, well, that's all well and good, but what if I would like to use a copyright work in something that I make, but without stealing it? Because, that's illegal. Well, here there are some special provisions that we can go over. The first one that I would like to touch on is called fair use. And to put it simply, fair use is a provision of copyright law that permits other people and parties to use a copyrighted work, or just parts of it, without asking the creator, but only under special circumstances. Usage of a copyrighted work is considered to fall under fair use when 1. The copyrighted work is not being used in an unchanged way for profit. 2. How much of the work was thought up by its author or based in fact. To give an example, a fantasy story with a bunch of original ideas and concepts is going to be much harder to use fairly than, say, a nonfiction book that is just covering things in the real world that we already know to be true, that no one necessarily had to imagine. 3. How much of the work was used. So if you only use a couple of short clips from a movie, let's say, when you are doing a presentation, this is much more likely to fall under fair use than taking the entire movie, showing it, and then claiming that you're using it fairly, when really this could just be an attempt to spread the movie, which would be a copyright violation if you don't have permission. 4. Whether or how much of the work is being used may harm its audience or market value. Now, this one is a little bit more complicated, but the main idea is that if using a work fairly causes the work to become, say, worth less money, or causes people to not buy the officially published version of the work that the author can make money off of, then that is harming its market value because you can get the same thing for free. Fair use also considers whether using the work can cause any harm to the audience directly. For instance, something that is not appropriate for young kids to see may not fall under fair use if it's being used in a school lesson, even if it fits all of the other conditions of fair use. Now, fair use generally does apply to educational and other nonprofit uses of copyrighted material. So you can't duplicate and spread a whole copyrighted work outright, but this provision does a lot to protect students, such as yourself, in cases where you use only part of, or even adapt or change, a copyrighted work in some way. There are a few other ways, besides fair use, that you can legally use creative works. Now, note that I use the word creative instead of copyrighted, because copyright is not the only type of license protection that can apply to a piece of intellectual property. The biggest example, and this has been around for a while, are Creative Commons licenses. And these are restrictions and permissions that the creator of an artwork chooses to place upon that artwork so that others may use it under those conditions that the artist has chosen themselves. Now, usually Creative Commons licenses are less strict than copyright licenses, and this is so knowledge and information can be spread a little bit more easily and freely throughout the world without, not giving credit to the original work or how the work was made. So there are several Creative Commons licenses, but a few types of them are Creative Commons by, which involves the material being allowed to be used if credit is given to the original creator. Creative Commons by non-commercial, which means that the material can only be used for non-commercial purposes and if credit is given to the original creator. And Creative Commons by non-commercial, not derivative, which means, in short, that the material can only be used for non-commercial purposes if it is not in a derivative or changed form, and if credit is given to the original creator. If a work doesn't have a Creative Commons license, though, or if you want to use a copyrighted work in a way that doesn't fall under fair use, you can also contact the owner of the copyright license directly to ask them for permission to use it. As a license owner, they're given the ability to allow others to use their work as they see fit, so long as they give this permission themselves before any actual use takes place. Copyright law does actually get pretty complex, and this is only the most basic overview of it. But just to make sure that we have all of the main ideas down, let's go over a quick summary of what copyright is one more time. Copyright is a type of law that helps protect works of intellectual property from being stolen, spread, or sold by people other than the original creators. Something counts as intellectual property protected by copyright when it's an original idea or work of art that a person or organization turns into some kind of tangible format, whether this be something physical, like on a piece of paper, or digital so you can see it on a screen. Copyright matters for a lot of different reasons, but the main one is that one, credit can be given to the original creator when a work has copyright protections, and two, because a lot of different people and organizations make different works of intellectual property for work or for careers, these artists' incomes are protected by copyright law. And even unpublished works by independent artists are protected by copyright law. There are several protections that are given by copyright, but a few include the right to sell and distribute or spread around copies of the work, to make changes or changed versions of the work, and to perform or display the work, as well as give other people permission to sell or distribute their work. There are a couple of ways that you can use copyrighted materials. One involves fair use. And this is a series of conditions where the copyrighted work is not being used in an unchanged way for profit. The copyrighted work is, say, a little bit less imaginative, or then more imaginative, how much of the work was used, and whether the work being used harms the audience or market value. You can also obtain permission from copyright owners to use the work directly, as long as that takes place before the actual use. And then there are alternative Creative Commons licenses to copyright that are a little bit less strict than the copyright licenses themselves. The great thing about copyright is that it applies to all of us so long as we put our ideas into some kind of tangible format. So, even if you're a small artist who, say, writes or draws for your own enjoyment, your works are copyrighted so long as you put them in that format. And other people cannot use, steal, or sell them without your permission. So copyright doesn't just help big movie studios and corporations that are putting out all these different kinds of pieces of artworks. It also helps you and me protect our original ideas. This is precisely why copyright law is so important to know about, and why I'm very glad that I got to introduce you to the topic today. Thank you for listening, and happy creating.